Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode on the channel. So today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be changing the thermal paste in my 2012 MacBook Pro 13-inch Retina display. So the thermal paste I'm going to be using today is just generic thermal paste. It's created by a company called Arctic Ice. It's a polysynthetic thermal paste. So what this should do is this should improve the thermals of this laptop. So if you do have a MacBook Pro and you find that it's getting pretty hot, I did read on some online forums that changing the thermal paste could increase the efficiency of the fans. Now, the MacBook Pros do have pretty good thermals for this year, this model year of MacBook Pro. The fans don't run at their full speed because Apple wants it to not sound too loud in the background. So this is also another problem which you could also change. You could increase the speed of the fans instead of changing the thermal paste. But my MacBook Pro has come to the point where the thermal paste needs a swap. It is over 9 years old, so that is pretty old thermal paste. So once you open up the laptop, you have to take off all the screws on the bottom. You have to make sure that you have the correct screwdriver to take out the screws. I had to try a couple of different tips just because Apple screws are very hard to use and they're a certain shape, and if you don't have the correct shape, you could strip the screws. So just be careful when you're taking off the screws on the bottom panel. So once the bottom panel's off, the portion of the cooling system that we're going to be taking off is the metal tube that you can see on the very top of the screen. I also unscrewed the fans just because off of camera I was checking underneath the board to make sure there was no dust buildup, and lucky for me there was no dust underneath the board. So you could also check this while you're taking off the cooling system since you already have it out of there anyways. To take off the fans, you just remove the screws that are surrounding the fans. There's about 3 of them that hold the fans in. So something interesting that I noticed when I was taking off the heat pipe is that there's these 2 pieces of rubber on each side. So what this rubber does is it separates it from the bottom of the case. So I left these on when I reinstalled the tube, but just be careful when you reinstall it because sometimes the rubber wants to move. I don't know if this is just mine because I've had the case apart so many times now, but it did move around quite a bit when I took it off. So when I'm looking at this thermal paste that came off of the original heat pipe, this is the original thermal paste that Apple installed. You can tell that it's not totally covering the whole chip. It's kind of off to the side and it's not really covering the portion that it's supposed to. You're supposed to cover the metallic portion so that way we can conduct the heat through to the copper pipe. So after seeing this, this is why my MacBook Pro had terrible thermal performance. So this upgrade of thermal paste should increase the performance of this MacBook Pro because it'll reduce the thermal throttling that it will have as I am gaming or if I'm watching a video. So now this isn't the top end spec MacBook Pro from 2012. It's only i5 with 2 gigahertz processor with about 8 gigs of RAM. So I did upgrade the storage. If you missed that video, go check it out. It's on my channel page. So as you can see here, I'm trying to clean the thermal paste that originally came on the CPU. So this thermal paste was so dry and crusty that it was basically falling off, but just to do it properly, I used 99.9% rubbing alcohol with a Q-tip to soak it down, and then I wiped it off with a paper towel. So just you have to make sure that you clean the thermal paste really well before you reinstall the new thermal paste. So in doing this, you're making sure that you're going to get a good contact with both surfaces with the fresh thermal paste. So as you can see, I'm cleaning off the heat pipe too. You have to make sure that this surface is very clean because this is the portion that's going to be in contact with the actual chip. So once that's all clean, how I installed the thermal paste is I just ran a bead of the thermal paste down the middle of the CPU. I know for most CPUs you're supposed to install little tiny pea-sized dots, but for this one I just went a little bit overkill with the thermal paste and I just kind of did a small bead right across the center of it. So I have been using the MacBook Pro after I did this video. It's been about 48 hours since I did this video, and I have noticed a huge improvement in the performance of the MacBook Pro. So while not watching Netflix videos before I did the thermal paste change, it would get extremely warm on top of the keyboard, and now I've noticed that it's a reasonable temperature, and the temperatures are staying at 70 degrees Celsius, which is pretty impressive. Before, they were going to 80 and 90 degrees Celsius. So I know that it was the thermal paste, and it wasn't the fan performance. So I know that the fans are working perfectly in this device, and I don't have to worry about that. So when reinstalling the cooling pipe, I made sure that the screws around the CPU were installed first, and to install them I did them opposite of each other. I did the bottom one first, then the top, and then the other bottom one, and then the next top one. So in doing this, I did it like an X because I wanted to squish down onto the thermal paste evenly, because if I screw in one side at a time, it'll push the thermal paste off of the CPU like you saw previously. So in doing this, it should keep most of the thermal paste on the CPU, and when looking underneath the board trying to glance at the CPU, I did not see any thermal paste leaking out of the edges around the metallic portion of the CPU, which means I installed it correctly. So the next step is you have to install the back panel of your MacBook Pro, and make sure that you install all of the screws that came with the MacBook Pro. It's very important not to tighten these down too much, because if you do, there's a potential you could strip them, and then you're never going to get the case back off again. So what I like to do is I bought this case off of Amazon just to kind of cover up the screws in case I did them a little bit too loose. And this case is so tight that even if the screws aren't done up fully, the bottom panel will not fall off. So if you're wondering where I got this thermal paste from, I just got it from my local computer store, Canada Computers, and it was about $8 for the tube. And if you're wondering if it's worth it, 100% is worth it. I haven't noticed any heat coming out of the device recently, and I tried to stream multiple videos, and that's where it was really having a hard time previously before I changed the thermal paste. So after this change, I'm able to watch YouTube videos, also have other tabs open, without getting too much heat coming out of the device, so that it's not too hot when you touch it. The problem I was having before is right about the function keys. That bar of metal was getting so hot that I couldn't actually touch the device, and I was surprised that I haven't actually burnt out the chip from how hot it was getting. So if you like this content, please press that like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and let me know how I did in the comments below. Thanks for watching.